Shame on Chicago. Shame on the system.
America, I need to walk you through this massive story coming out of Chicago because it perfectly shows how corrupt police departments end up costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars while the city literally goes broke. We're talking about a $90 million settlement. That's $90 million of your tax money to clean up the mess left by one corrupt cop and his crew. But here's the kicker. Chicago is facing a $1.5 billion budget deficit in 2026, yet they're setting aside $82 million annually just to pay for police misconduct settlements like it's a normal city expense. This is financial insanity disguised as accountability.
Following this story, a major development and one of the largest police misconduct scandals in Chicago's history.
The city's paying out $90 million to settle wrongful conviction cases. All of them are tied to former Chicago Police Sergeant Ronald Watts and his tactical team.
What is up, guys? Tyson Dela Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. While politicians are patting themselves on the back for this settlement, taxpayers are going to get stuck with the bill for decades of corruption and incompetence. Let me break down who Ronald Watts was and why this case is going to cost taxpayers $90 million. Watts was a Chicago police sergeant who basically ran a criminal enterprise while wearing a badge. He was operating in the Ida B. Wells public housing project, planting drugs on innocent people, extorting money from residents, and sending people to prison for crimes that they didn't even commit.
Watch them team just came and ran up in the building. And the people that ran, I didn't run because I didn't have nothing on me.
Maurice Harris is happy to have his life back. It was taken for 3 years after he was wrongfully incarcerated.
When they came back downstairs, they say, "These y'all drugs." I'm like, "Come on, watch, y'all just search me. Y'all know I ain't had nothing on me." Well, he said, "Well, these yours and y'all going to jail today."
This wasn't some rogue cop acting alone. He had a whole tactical team working with them, literally destroying lives for profit. In 2013, Watts pled guilty to extortion and got a sentence of just 22 months in prison. 22 months. Meanwhile, his victims spent decades behind bars for crimes that they didn't even commit.
The numbers are absolutely staggering. 176 lawsuits, nearly 200 people combined.
Here's how massive this corruption was. 176 lawsuits, 180 victims who collectively spent nearly, get this, 200 years in prison for crimes that they didn't commit. Think about that. 200 years of stolen lives because one corrupt cop and his crew. Now here's where it gets really infuriating for taxpayers. Chicago has already spent $231 million just in 2025 to resolve police misconduct lawsuits. That's just this year. And now they're adding another $90 million for the Watts cases.
The CBS News Chicago investigators found today's proposed $90 million settlement comes after $11 million in prior settlements connected to Watts and at least another $25 million spent on private law firms to defend Watts and the city in these cases. Total bill for taxpayers, a staggering $126 million.
But wait, it gets worse. Between 2016 and 2024, the city spent $25 million just on private lawyers to defend Ronald Watts and his crew. So the total cost for these 185 cases is actually $126 million when you include legal fees. The city's corruption council is trying to spin this as a good deal, saying they're saving taxpayers money because continuing to fight these cases would have cost between $350 million and $500 million over the next 5 years. And here's what makes this settlement even more outrageous. Chicago is facing a massive budget crisis. The city is projected to have a $146 million deficit in 2025 and a staggering $1.1 billion budget shortfall in 2026.
Richardson Lowry says $25 million has been spent on private attorneys to represent the city on Watts cases in federal court. And had the city continued to fight the civil rights cases, the projected cost up to $500 million.
But here's the kicker. Chicago is literally budgeting for police corruption like it's a normal city expense. They're setting aside $82 million annually just to pay for police misconduct settlements. Think about that. They're planning for the police to be so corrupt that they need a budget nearly $100 million every year just to pay for victims. Meanwhile, the city is facing cuts to essential services, federal funding reductions, rising personnel costs, but somehow they find the money to pay for police misconduct settlements. The most infuriating part of this whole story is watching Chicago politicians actually celebrate this settlement. City council members are calling it a staggering good outcome for taxpayers. One alderman said he was relieved it didn't cost more.
Mayor Johnson shared a statement saying, "It's a historic moment that reflects our commitment to accountability and healing." Police Superintendent Larry Snelling said the cases involved in this settlement do not represent the Chicago Police Department of today.
Are you kidding me? You're celebrating having to pay $90 million because your police department was so corrupt that innocent people spent 200 years in prison? That's not a relief. That's a complete failure of leadership and accountability. Mayor Brandon Johnson, Mayor Mohawk, is calling this a historic moment that reflects the commitment to accountability and healing. But where's the accountability for the system that allowed this to happen in the first place? Where's the accountability for supervisors who enabled Ronald Watts?
110 cases have been thrown out, all receiving certificates of innocence and some compensation from the state. Lawyers pushed for more men and women to be let out, but that didn't happen.
We have 83 other individuals in our petition whose cases were not resolved today.
This isn't just about Ronald Watts. One civil rights attorney estimates that Chicago has over $1 billion in wrongful conviction cases pending right now. We're talking about other corrupt cops like Ronald Guevara and the legacy of John Berg torture cases.
Attorneys for the exonerees issued a statement saying, in part, "We are happy the parties were able to work together to reach a resolution to this dark chapter in the city's history." The Finance Committee considers the settlement on Monday. It could go to full city council on September 25th.
From 2000 to 2023, Chicago has spent $750 million on wrongful conviction litigations. This is a pattern, not an isolated incident. Chicago Police Department has been a criminal enterprise masquerading as law enforcement for decades. The $90 million will be paid in 2 installments in 2026, which means they're kicking the can down the road while their budget crisis gets worse. This is financial insanity. They're borrowing money to pay for corruption while the city goes broke. America, this $90 million settlement is not justice. It's a taxpayer-funded cover-up. Real justice would be prosecuting everyone who enabled Ronald Watts, firing every supervisor who looked the other way, and completely reforming the system that allowed this to actually happen. Instead, Chicago taxpayers get to pay $90 million while politicians congratulate themselves for quote-unquote solving the problem they created and enabled for years. And you can bet this won't be the last massive settlement Chicago has to pay for police corruption. Here's the real tragedy. Chicago is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on corruption settlements. They're facing a $1.15 billion deficit. Essential services are being cut, but there's always money to pay for police misconduct. This is what happens when you have leadership that's more interested in protecting the system than protecting the people. The victims get some money, the politicians claim they're reformers, and the taxpayers get stuck with the bill while nothing fundamentally changes.
Shame on Chicago. Shame on the system.
5 men wrongfully convicted are now exonerated, but their fight for justice is far from over.
Pay attention to how your local government handles police misconduct. Are they preventing it or just budgeting to pay for it after the fact? Because if they're doing what Chicago is doing, you're going to be paying for corruption for decades to come. Let me know what you guys think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.